right, everyone, my time says 12:05, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. First of all, thank you for tuning in to our forum today. We're really excited to still be able to share this information with everyone, even in the midst of COVID-19. So thank you for spending your time with us this afternoon. My name is Kelsey Denoyer. I am the Partners of Scott County Watersheds Coordinator. And if you're unfamiliar with Partners, it is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to providing education, technical guidance, and volunteer opportunities about water quality to the citizens of Scott County in Iowa. And one of the ways that we provide education is through these monthly forums. So there are some more coming up and some other opportunities. So you can save those dates here. Our next forum is next Tuesday, May 18th. And that will be presented by the Iowa Landowners, or it'll be about the Iowa Landowners Options Program. And then we also have a special workshop coming up the following day, all about stream bank restoration. So check out our website, follow us on Facebook, write these down in your calendar, whatever you got to do to be there, because they're going to be pretty great. And I just like to take a moment to thank our partners. Without them, we wouldn't be able to provide all these opportunities to everybody. So thank you. And with that being said, if you're interested in becoming a member or a funding partner, we have lots of options available. So check us out, go to our website. If you're interested, you can take more of a look, or you can send me an email and I'd be happy to help you out. And finally, partners received some free nitrogen test strips from Iowa Corn, and we are going to be offering those to you all. So if you're interested in receiving these strips, you can send us an email and we will send them to you, or we can come out and help you to test your site. We are not a government or advocacy agency, so all of the information that we collect is confidential. We're not reporting to anybody. We're just here to help you out. So if you're interested, let us know. And with that, I am done here. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers for today. We have Judy, Joyce, and Reed Stammer. And I'm going to go ahead and hand over the presentation reins to them.
Wonderful. Great. Thanks, Kelsey. So thanks everybody for joining us today for our talk about the Field of Dreams watershed. And we've titled this talk, "If You Clean It, They Will Come," with the idea that if we clean up the water, people will return to the water, families will come to the water, communities will embrace the water, and they'll no longer see it as a place of, water is something that makes you sick. Water is something you need to worry about with flooding, but water is something that we want to be a part of, and we want to recreate in, and we want we want water to be a part of our community. So my name is Judy Joyce. I'm a geomorphologist with Impact 7G. I've been working with wetland and streams for over 25 years. And really, I guess I want to say, when I was a kid, I was the one that was in the creek, in the trees, in the mud, playing in the dirt, and that sort of transition to my day job. So I'll let Reed introduce himself.
Yeah, my name is Reed Stammer. I'm a stream restoration ecologist with Impact 7G. I've also been working in wetland and stream work for a little over 10 years. I'm actually a Davenport native, so it's pretty cool to be talking in this context. I used to play in Duck Creek quite a bit when I was younger, so yeah, it's pretty awesome it all comes full circle. So.
Mm-hmm. And so, oops, sorry about that. Let me get started to look at the watershed that this project is located in. It's the headwaters of the North Fork of the Maquoketa River watershed, basically in this Huck 10 that goes basically Dyersville is about in the center of it down to Cascade. And the city of Dyersville itself is at the confluence between Hewitt Creek, the North Fork of the Maquoketa, and Bear Creek. And if you can see in this photo, everything that you see that's hatched is floodway. And then everything in this sort of blue and brown color, that's floodplain. So if you can see here, the outline of Dyersville, I'm hoping you can see that on your screen, is like this, that they're very aware that the creeks are in their backyard. They're especially aware when it floods. So they've been flooded, you know, several times. Here's a photograph here of sediment being removed. And basically when these creeks overtop their banks, they get a lot of attention, kind of like a 2-year-old in the grocery store having a fit. And so they've spent a lot of time and a lot of money like dealing with flood mitigation and property buyouts and really trying to deal with the hazards associated with the creeks. However, the rest of the time, which of course is most of the time, the creeks are, you know, not flooding and they're pretty much ignored. There's limited access to the creek. There's limited recreational opportunities with the creek. There's very poor aesthetics, and there's no real connection to the communities. The creeks are not a destination. They're not incorporated into the trail system, and really they have been ignored. And so when we met with the City of Dyersville, they were really looking at how can we change this? And we started making these different connections. How can we connect the community to the water? How can we connect it to the creek? And the first thing we did is we rebrand the watershed. So this is sort of a new concept for me as a geologist, to start thinking of myself as someone who does marketing. But we basically gave this watershed a new name, and we called it the Field of Dreams watershed. And what this did is, when I would tell people about some of the issues in this watershed with water quality, with erosion, and that the community was trying to do best management practices to improve water quality and reduce flooding, it was hard to get people excited about it. But if I said something like, hey, have you heard of the Field of Dreams watershed? And they'd be like, oh, what's that? And then I could go into my spiel. So really, just by branding the watershed and connecting it to the Field of Dreams, we were able to get some momentum and some energy behind the work that we were doing. And so what started with, oops, sorry about that. What started sort of some of these efforts was a brownfield redevelopment within the City of Dyersville. They basically took a contaminated site and cleaned it up, and then converted that to part of it is a brewery, the Textile Brewing Company in Dyersville. If you're in the area, please take part in the brewery. Enjoy the water. There's also a new housing development there. And then they were looking for ways to improve access to the creek. So there was really an economic incentive to restore these creeks. And that was really the driver in this, is how can we restore these creeks? How can we provide recreation? How can we get young people to stay in Dyersville so we have a source for staffing for employers? So again, there was these economic drivers to improve the water quality. And so we worked on a concept plan looking at restoring Bear Creek, which is this creek here, and the North Fork of the Maquoketa. This was the brownfield redevelopment area with Textile Brewery. And then they were looking at a little pocket park here. What their goals was to restore these creeks, to do some water quality practices with oxbows and wetland restoration, to improve access to these creeks, and to improve some recreation along those creeks. Things like inner tubes, kayaks, wading in the creek, other sort of passive activities that you could do along the creek, which with this sort of motto, again, tying into that Field of Dreams watershed, that if you build it, you will bring people back to the water. You will bring people back to this community. And so the question came is, where's the funding coming from for this? So at the time, they were working on updating their wastewater treatment plant, and they were using state revolving funds. And so with the state revolving loan funds, basically a lot of communities use this money to finance any water or wastewater improvement project. The nice thing is these are low interest and that they're spread out over 20 years. So it's a great way to finance something if you don't have the capital. But then not too long ago, they came up with what's called a sponsored project program. And what this is that, let's say you borrow $1 million for a wastewater treatment improvement, and over time, your interest is going to be 1.2 million. What they'll end up doing is, rather than paying that money in interest, you could use that money instead as a water quality improvement project. So in a way, it was sort of like free money. Instead of that money going to the bank or going back to the state in interest, you could use that money as a water quality practice. And this had been done to do things like pervious pavement, stormwater wetlands, biocells, but it hadn't really been used for stream restoration before. And that's what we wanted to use it for. And so the question came is, can we use SRF funds for stream restoration? And for a while, the DNR hadn't been that comfortable with it. And this is my my picture of a cozy kitten, and look how comfortable it is. So the goal was to make the DNR as comfortable as this cozy kitten. And so what they did is the DNR came up with a toolbox that could be used to help do stream restoration work. And it would provide not only some drawings for engineers and different practices that would work or wouldn't work, sort of a decision-making toolbox, but it was also a tool that could help with communication so that people were on the same page. And it provided a checklist that would help make those reviewers and those funding agencies comfortable enough to fund a stream restoration project as a water quality practice. So the toolbox was really key into allowing us to use this funding for stream restoration. And so basically, these are the connections that were made. There was this connection to the Field of Dreams, and again, use that to help drive the community to understand what we were doing, basically to capture their attention, to have that community and an economic driver to help them realize that by improving the water, it will help attract businesses to the area, and it'll help attract employees to work at those businesses, to have a funding source available like the SRF funding source. And then again, this toolbox that would provide that level of comfort so that that funding could be used. That's what led to this Bear Creek Restoration Project. So Reed here will tell you about what the restoration project was. I'll turn it over to Reed.
Awesome. Thanks, Judy. Yeah, so, we have this really overarching goal of what Judy was talking about. And it's like, how do we make that a reality? How do we, start actually pushing dirt around and making the stream better? So, first we have to sort of identify what the issues and the goals are. And we talked with the city, just to see what they viewed as issues. And we also sort of made them aware of other things that, they might not have noticed, but were issues or could be problematic in the future. So one of the big things along Bear Creek is that they obviously had some erosion in the past, and they basically, on the eastern side of it, they put riprap or stone along almost the entire bank from the inside of the stream all the way to the top of the bank. It was a pretty impressive amount of rock. So next slide, please. Another issue that they were not aware of, and I made them sort of acutely aware of it, is they had Japanese knotweed growing in one distinct patch along Bear Creek, and it likes to spread downstream by breaking off stems, and it'll root at every little node on this plant. So it was something we definitely wanted to take care of before it got any worse. So that was another issue. Next slide, please. And yeah, there were some just issues with how the channel had been migrating. It was actually trying to self-adjust in some areas, but because of the amount of riprap and rock they had put in, it added a constraint so that the stream wasn't able to self-adjust and do what it is supposed to do, which is good. It means that, you know, the stream is working or trying to work, so we just need to nudge it in the right direction. And then some of the other issues would be, you know, there's a lot of other sort of erosion control methods that, you know, maybe not sanctioned, where they just dump concrete in. It's something you see on a lot of stream banks, is where they put these big flat stones that are just, you know, old sidewalk. They're really, really bad at holding stream banks together because the water can still flow beneath them and pipe underneath it. So that was another issue. And then, of course, flooding is something that they're acutely aware of. So, you know, something we probably can't solve with this, but by doing water quality practices throughout, you know, watersheds, we can help mitigate it, at least to some degree. So now that we've identified the issues, then this is where the toolbox comes in to sort of help figure out, or help us as practitioners figure out how we address these issues. So the toolbox itself is basically, it's a bunch of best management practices that aid everyone in the process, from like the decision makers, the people who dole out the money, to the practitioners, to the engineers, to the people, the contractors. And its emphasis is really on incorporating natural materials, using the power of the stream itself and the natural processes to help make it a healthy, self-sustaining stream instead of an over-engineered, locked-in stream. And it consists of, I believe, about 56 individual practices, which when you start combining them, which is sort of the point of this, there's an infinite number of ways you can treat a stream. So as I sort of mentioned, it provides this really consistent and relevant way of assessing and designing, so that reviewers and everybody can speak the same language. So within that, it also has detailed drawings and specifications, and we'll dive into that a little bit more later in the talk. So its two main components are, it has an assessment tool where you go out, you look at the creek, you figure out what's wrong with it, and then it has a series of practices that it recommends based on how you assess this. So the assessment tool is, in its current iteration, is an interactive Excel spreadsheet with a whole bunch of macros working on in the background. And you go out, you do a field assessment where you survey the creek, you take cross sections, you take a profile, you input all these different characteristics and metrics, and based on those, the toolbox will, or this spreadsheet will flag the drivers of instability. You know, is your stream degrading? Is it cutting down? Is it aggrading? You know, is it starting to build up because it has too much sediment? And based on those drivers of instability, it tells you which practices and techniques are that are appropriate. You know, it's not a one size fits all. And like I said, based on that, you can sort of dial in how you want to treat this stream given the context of where it is. And then what you can actually like start inputting and playing around with the numbers within this spreadsheet to see, well, what if I change the sinuosity of the creek? How is that going to affect these drivers of instability? So it gives you, sort of a template to play around on to figure out how to make a good design. Next slide, please. So within this context, on Bear Creek, there are three distinct reaches. Reach 1 from upstream to downstream, there's Reach 1, Reach 2, and below this 3rd Street Bridge, there's Reach 3. And that's where at the mouth of Reach 3 is where it flows into the North Fork of the Maquoketa River. Next slide. So the critical thing for doing an assessment is to find bank full. And if you're not aware of what bank full is, it's sort of similar to the ordinary high water. It's basically like when a stream, like the bank full is when a stream is most efficient at moving both water and sediment. So it's really critical to get that elevation really dialed in. And this is sort of like the real world problem solving. You know, we were the guinea pigs for using this toolbox. So this is how the process sort of played out for us. Next slide, please. So during our initial assessment, you know, we went out there, we ID'd some of the things I brought up earlier. There's invasive species. You can sort of see there's a lot of this riprap in the foreground, but as far as the stream itself, there's some eroding banks. So we sort of thought that might be an issue. Next slide, please. You'll be able to see that in this one. So we took all our measurements, we filled out the spreadsheet, and we turned it into the DNR to Nate Hogeveen. He's the river coordinator. He's the guy who reviews all this. And he looked at it and said, you know, this bank height ratio is crazy. It's way too high, and the cross-sectional area is way too low, and the velocity is just off the charts too low. And I was sort of just like, okay, well, you know, what ranges is it supposed to be in for this? You know, how does the toolbox actually work? So he gave us some suggestions to sort of try to tweak that. So if you can see on this, the blue line is what we were calling our bank full. And he's sort of he said, well, it's way too low. So you'll see on the next slide for reach 2, it was really a similar thing. The bank height ratios they didn't make sense based on if you look at similar streams with similar watersheds. Next slide, please. I think 2 more. So like I mentioned, he basically said our bank full calls are likely low. And in a degraded stream like this that's been really messed with, bank full is super hard to find at times. So what we were seeing in the field was actually something called an inner berm. It's another depositional feature that's usually lower, obviously, than bank full. So he suggested just raising it to another reasonable area. And it actually happened to coincide with the top of the bank, which was very convenient. And then when we reassessed that, the numbers started to make sense. You know, so if we move it from way down here where your cross-sectional area is itty bitty to up here, the numbers start to pan out a little bit better. So you can see the bank height ratio is 1. That's what you want, you know, that if the other ones where it was like 6, that would be like a canyon that you would be in. So, so once we sort of figured out that our bank full, where it ought to be, we were able to sort of start playing around with some of these existing conditions where in the red it's flagged as, you know, this is not functional. Yellow means that it's somewhat functional but needs to be addressed, and green means that it's typically something that's functional. And where it says regional curves, this is an old iteration. These are just we didn't have these in the toolbox yet, so it's sort of irrelevant anyway. So we were able to sort of address some of those issues. So we knew that, you know, could you actually go back to the previous slide? Sorry, Judy. We knew that this Schum channel evolution stage was non-functional. So we wanted to get it to something that's more stable. We flagged, very importantly, that the radius of curvature was way too tight and that those needed to be adjusted. And we had some issues with the pool-to-pool spacing. They were too close together and they needed to be a little bit further apart. Next slide, please. So once we entered in sort of like the design conditions that we wanted for this project, this is where it's really cool, and it actually ranks the various practices that you can use. So, grade control wasn't really a huge issue here, but there were some practices that would be appropriate that we actually ended up employing. Like we used rock constructed riffles. We installed them at grade just so it would help oxygenate the water. It would add some roughness, and some additional habitat. We ended up using stone toe protection, some cutoff sills, J hooks, partially because we had all of that rock that was, excessively along the east bank that we wanted to reuse and sort of recycle instead of just hauling it off or burying it. It just seemed like a more sustainable approach to restoring the stream. So the initial impacts of the toolbox on the project, we were able, like I said, to reduce the amount of riprap, and we reused all of it somewhere on it, or left it in situ when it was appropriate. And we were able to build structures out of it. One of the key things we really wanted to do was sort of make it easier for the neighborhood kids to access the creek. Even as a fully grown adult, it was very difficult climbing those banks and not falling in, or trying not to twist an ankle just because the rock was unsorted. It was very large. And so access was a really a key thing. And like, it's right next to a bike path. There was kids, asking what we were doing when we were out there restoring the stream or assessing it. We saw people floating down it. So they were using it. We just wanted to make it better and more accessible. As I mentioned, on a more technical aspect, it flagged that a key issue in the stream was this tight radius of curvature. So we ID'd that, and we were able to remedy that. And we were able to sort of tighten the actual cross section of the channel, which would promote some additional depth in the pool. So that's great fishing habitat. That's also great swimming hole habitat for the kids in the neighborhood. And then we actually were able to identify, and this is also really important, that Reach 3, which was downstream, was actually in pretty good shape. There was no need to do any work to it in its current condition. So it saved money, it saved resources, and just, there's no reason to do a project just for a project's sake if there's no actual issues with it. And then in the end, it really streamlined the review process. We were able to just speak the same language, and everybody was on the same page, and it actually went very, very smoothly, especially considering it was the first SRF project using this toolbox. So this would be like the radius of curvature that I was talking about. If you don't have any context as to what it is, it's basically just, if you draw on a little bend, you draw a radius on it, and if it's too tight, it can cause some issues. So once we ID'd that, which is shown on the left, that's the problematic ones, and the center is what we were able to change it to by sort of slightly realigning and tweaking the channel alignment. And on the right is just an overlay of those curvatures. And this is just sort of a view from on the ground of what that looks like, where it has a very gentle sinuosity. You can see that the riprap has been removed from the top of the bank down to about midway down. That's where it's actually going to provide some really good bank protection, is in that lower area. Once it gets above a certain point, it's diminishing returns. It's just sort of rock for rock's sake. So the other half of the river restoration toolbox is that you have your assessment and you do your design, but it also includes these really detailed drawings of the various practices. And like I said, they're supposed to be used in conjunction with one another. It's not a, hey, let's just use stone toe protection and we'll restore the creek. So in this instance, this is for installing an oxbow or an off-channel meander. The recommendation is to use a structure called a J hook in combination with that to help maintain the integrity of the oxbow reduce some of the deposition into it. So, you have your Oxbow drawings, but you can also go and look at the detailed J-hook drawings, and it has every single dimension that you could possibly imagine. It has your plan view, your cross section as well, and it tells you exactly what each of these are and what how to design them appropriately. So your J-hook should be about 1/3 of that bank full width. And these are also in CAD as well. So for the designers out there, you can just directly import these drawings and start tweaking them and playing with them to fit your project. So it's really handy to have. And yeah, this is just an example of some of these practices being used in combination with each other. So this is looking downstream. So you have this Oxbow 1 on the right, and it high flows, the water flows into that, and it flows out at this little grade control just to make sure that that Oxbow can hold water. And that actually goes upstream just above this J-hook structure. And the J-hook functions to basically tell that stream velocity, where the stream is flowing, to keep it in the center of the channel, to not blow out to one bank or the other. And it helps protect those banks so that, when at those higher flows, when it goes into Oxbow 2, it's not going to erode the inlet here. So it keeps that integrity. And you'll also see there's some of that stone toe protection as well. And this is just a couple different views. So on the left, this is facing upstream. So Oxbow 1 would be on the top left. The J-hook structure is sort of in the center. On the right picture, this is sort of the opposite view facing downstream. Just showing how the structures work together. And this is sort of another really nice part about the toolbox that we discovered was handy about it. As we were working through this, we actually figured out that when talking with the actual contractor who's moving the dirt around, he told me, he's like, there's no way, with how sandy and how loamy these soils are, that if we just build a bank, that it's going to stay put. And that's something we initially had in our drawings, and we decided to take them out because I sort of wanted to allow a little bit more flexibility in there to let the stream readjust. But when you start, when you looked at it in the real world, it didn't make sense to allow it. We had lots of utilities running through here and adjacent to here, and we needed to shore it up a little bit more. But since we had the toolbox and we already had practices that were, flagged for being useful, I could look through it and say, okay, well, we need something that's going to help shore up the stream bank. But I still wanted to allow that flexibility without having the banks be totally armored with rock. So these cutoff sills are basically just, you put one in every 30 feet, it's slightly angled upstream. There's a little bit of deposition that happens behind it, but it basically keeps those flow vectors in the center of the channel and away from the bank. The channel has room to sort of meander back and forth as it wants within the constraints of the cutoff sills. So it was sort of a sweet spot of protecting infrastructure, but allowing the river to do what it wanted to self-adjust. So it's a nice adaptable thing to use. And just a couple more photos, because the picture says 1,000 words. The top left, the water's actually pretty high here, so the riprap goes down even further than what's shown in here, but you can see just how much rock was. And this is the same view. In the red is that Japanese knotweed, that really invasive, nasty plant. We actually hauled that off to the landfill, got rid of the dirt entirely because it's very, very noxious. You'll note that we removed the riprap above this about, that half bank full elevation, because as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't really do a whole lot above a certain elevation. So it's protecting this bank without being excessively rocked, and it's a lot easier to get down to the water if you need to. And then you'll see on the left, there's some inner berm structures in an Oxbow. That would be Oxbow 1 for reference. So And just some more, some pretty drone footage, because it's pretty awesome that drones are so readily available for photography, at least for I'm a geography guy, so aerial views are how I sort of view the world. So it's been really handy. So this is another structure that we used in here called a crossfane. And yeah, and this is another photo that just sort of shows, a good chunk of the stream. It's got this nice gentle sinuosity to it. We actually also rerouted the bike path through here. So those areas in black dirt in this are oxbow areas. So it's sort of a cool experience. And I'm really hoping once the native plants pop up that you go from park to pollinator habitat to right next to the creek and back in. And I'm really excited to see how it sort of pans out over the next couple of years when the flowers show up. So. And this is a before photo. The kid, like I said, the kids were trying to use it, but we got rid of some of the things like the trash, some of the hazards. So it's a little safer, at least from a, not getting impaled by rebar point of view.
Exactly. And thanks, Reed. So, that was something that was kind of nice to see when we were out there, is that even though this creek was in poor shape, kids still wanted to be there. Kids by their nature want to be in nature, and it's sort of our, us old people that are like, oh, don't let them play next to trash. Don't let them, they'll get hurt. But these girls didn't care. They floated right by us. So, so again, we're really excited that now that this creek is more inviting, that again, you'll see more of this happen. And again, this is really all about connections. So again, we had all these different things fall into place to get the Bear Creek project going. And now this Bear Creek is a launching point for some other initiatives that are happening. So what we did is we've come up with a Field of Dreams Watershed Initiative, which is basically a vision plan to show where the city of Dyersville wants to go from here. We're using this to build some community support and to energize that community and the businesses to get them to buy in and to support these projects. We're looking at some additional funding for this, water quality practices, as well as for flood hazard mitigation, with the idea that this will be a poster child for what a community can do to address water quality on a watershed scale. Intensely do this. So rather than, some practices within the watershed, this is really looking at it, I want to say aggressively looking at it to see what we can do. So what our current vision is within city limits is to basically restore each of these reaches. Whoops. Sorry about that. Each of these creeks within the city limits. So we have Bear Creek, North Fork, and Hewitt Creek, with the idea that we're going to go through and do restoration activities along the entire reach of creeks, which is about 3 to 4 miles, and then also restore about 200 acres, 150 acres of wetlands through this with additional best management water quality practices. So to really embrace the creeks, make this a community, connect to the Field of Dreams through Hewitt Creek. So Hewitt Creek goes actually right by the Field of Dreams. And the idea is that we'll use that creek as a connection between the Field of Dreams and the downtown city itself. So these are all the people that were involved. IDOLS, DNR, IIW was the engineer out of Dubuque, the Maquoketa River, WMA, the city of Dyersville, Steger Construction, which was great. They're a local contractor who worked on this. So they had a vested interest in making sure this was a good project. And then our team at Impact 7G. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to show you a video. And let's see if I can bring that up here. There we go. And this is just a short video that we did for the city. And in addition to this, we also have a live webcam with time-lapse photography that you can check out. And I'll provide a link to that later. So let me see if I can get this to work.
Every community needs clean water. Every community needs a place where people can touch the water, they can interact with the water. You know, whether you're a big city or a small town, everybody in America should be able to touch the water without getting sick. They should be able to eat the fish without getting sick. And that is what we do. We work with communities to do it one water, one watershed, and one community at a time.
Having clean water and improving water quality is always a good thing, but when you can improve the quality of life and your residents can get out and enjoy that trail next to an area like this, it's just so beneficial for your residents, and it's fantastic for the environment as well.
Oh, I tell you what, I am really excited about the Bear Creek Restoration Project. Streams in Dyersville have been just basically used as they exist. But they have not been utilized at all. In fact, they've been ignored in Dyersville. When we have a minor flood, it costs the taxpayers close to $80,000 to $100,000 just in sediment removal every single event that we go through. So actually what we did was we contacted Impact 7G. We talked to a person named Judy Joyce. She educated us in how river systems work, what could be utilized, and how we would best utilize the toolbox to really give us the biggest home run hit that we could possibly get.
This project is one of the first in the state to use the Iowa River Restoration Toolbox. The toolbox was used to assess the existing stream conditions and determine the best course of action for what should take place within the stream corridor.
When we first went out to look at Bear Creek, the first thing we noticed is that the entire east side of the bank was lined with riprap from head to toe. So again, you can imagine if kids are going to come up there or someone wants to get to the water, it's just really hard to get down to the creek when the whole top of the bank is tied with riprap. In addition, there was invasive species, mainly Japanese knotweed, that is not a benefit for habitat and can cause some erosion issues.
I had ridden along with the volunteer doing the sampling here in Dyersville and came down to this site, and the weeds were literally as high as my shoulders, and I could hardly see the creek at all. So it was very fun to come down today and see the difference, to hear the water, to see it, to see the new oxbows. Very exciting.
So as part of the stream assessment, we went out and surveyed the stream, we took cross sections, and we counted pebbles. And my pebble counting buddy was Reed Stommer. He's our stream restoration ecologist, and he can tell you all about how what the different structures are and how we came up with the design.
I'm Reed Stommer, a stream restoration ecologist for Impact 7G. When I first came out to Bear Creek, my initial impressions were, it's a highly urbanized stream, and obviously it runs through the middle of the city. There's a lot of riprap on the banks, and there's definitely room for improvement.
The project was proposed to have a restoration that would provide stormwater quality improvements, and that included oxbows, different structures in the river, veins and sills and linear deflectors into the stream flow.
This was put here at the northern extent of our project for several reasons. One is that it provides really great consistent grade control. So if this bridge that's further upstream gets replaced in the future and the riffle that's under it gets taken out, it's not going to change the dynamic of this stream right here. It also helps direct the flow to the center of the channel, reducing near bank stress on the stream banks. At low flow, I'd say it's about 2.5 feet deep, so it's a great place for fish to hang out. It provides a nice place to cross when there's low flow as well. And it helps oxygenate the water.
So the Bear Creek Restoration Project is just the first project in the overall Field of Dreams watershed vision plan. We started with Bear Creek. We're also going to do a stormwater wetland along the North Fork of the Maquoketa. And then there's a whole larger plan to look at additional stream restoration, additional wetlands throughout the whole city of Dyersville. Going northeast out of town will take you to the Field of Dreams. And if you wanted to, you could actually walk Hewitt Creek. Hewitt Creek comes up and meets up with the Field of Dreams about 3.5 miles out of town. If you go from the Field of Dreams and you walk the creek down, you would then go into the North Fork of the Maquoketa River, and then you would go through downtown and then through a West Side Park.
Well, I think the Bear Creek project really will be the first of many projects in the next 10 years. I think it's ahead of its time because of the fact that it does offer an educational component. It does offer the benefit of economic development opportunity to our downtown to really create a destination for people to show up and utilize. And finally, I think it also offers water quality improvements to our area and help reduce tax burdens of flooding in future events.
The City of Dyersville worked with Impact 7G and IIW to develop a vision for the future. Future improvements such as stream improvements, wetland improvements, native planting improvements. These are all slated to take place along Bear Creek and the North Fork of the Maquoketa.
The team of IIW and Impact 7G was an enjoyable experience, and the local community and the government trusts us as a team working together.
Again, when we think of watersheds, we think of those connections, we think of those water trails, we think of those as ways to connect not only water, but to connect people, to connect economic development, to connect recreation. Basically, it helps us make those connections. It helps us to make sure our designs are right. It makes sure that it incorporates all these different layers of water. Again, that's why we think of this as a one water, one watershed, one community at a time approach.
All right. Welcome back. All right. So if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat, or I don't know if Kelsey's collecting them and in Q&A. I just thanks again for inviting us to talk about this project. You can tell we're extremely excited and passionate about it. So anytime we can get people to listen to us tell more about Bear Creek and what Dyersville's doing, we're willing to step in.
Well, thank you guys again for sharing. I know I learned quite a bit, and I'm sure our participants got to learn quite a bit as well. We don't have any questions yet, so I'll give everyone a few minutes here to enter in if they have any. But I will say it's really cool seeing what you guys did. I actually grew up around there, just a few towns over, and went to middle school in Dyersville. So it's pretty cool to see all that happening, where I used to live. That's a really awesome thing that you guys are doing out there.
Yeah. And it is some of these things when you think about, doing work like this within, your own watershed, that, getting these projects moving forward, there's the design, the construction, the assessment, but really it's that community outreach and building that community support and finding a way that there's an economic benefit to cleaning up the water, I think helps move it along. And you can see this when you have communities that, think of like a lake community, where again, there's an economic benefit to have that lake clean because that has people, that's so that they can go swimming and they can go fishing there. And so there's an economic benefit. And so trying to find a way to tie into that, I think is important. It looks like someone asked if it's actually reduced flooding. We don't really know yet. It was just finished last fall. The modeling shows that it would not increase flooding. And I think some of the modeling showed that we'd actually have a small reduction in flooding during some events. So part of this, because we were putting structures into the stream, we had to go through the permitting process and model this just to make sure that we weren't going to do anything that would increase flooding within the area. And I would say, in addition to not, the area will flood. It's in a floodway, that we're not, we're in the area that it actually not only floods, but it's actually where you get moving water. And one of the things that they deal with on a fairly regular basis is sediment being deposited. And so the idea that, you have so much sediment sort of trapped in that stream that when it floods, it all becomes mobile and then just dumps out onto the banks. So it'll be interesting to see how what happens with sediment in the next flood event. So we're hoping that there's going to be a reduction in the amount of sediment and the amount of cleanup that's going to be needed. So, and I don't know, Reed, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covered it. The modeling showed about 1/10 of a foot reduction, but this project is just a very small part of the watershed overall. So if we had 100 of these sort of projects in the watershed, you would see, I think, some pretty significant flood mitigation. But I think it's more of a resiliency for the community. It's a good use of the land next to the river. So it's planted in natives now, as opposed to turf, so it should save the city some money. It's floodway. It's always going to flood in that area. Hopefully, Cascade will see at least some very, very minor flood mitigations downstream, but we'll see.
Yeah. For those of you that don't know, Major League Baseball is supposed to be doing a game at the Field of Dreams in August. And so the city is doing a large festival before that game occurs. And part of that festival will be talking about water quality and the Field of Dreams watershed. So, again, one of the uniqueness about this watershed is that it really has international attention, because we have ambassadors that want to throw out a baseball in the Field of Dreams, that they want to be in a cornfield throwing a ball around with their kid. And, during election times, there'll be senators and presidential candidates out there throwing baseballs around in the Field of Dreams. So it's really a watershed that has a lot of attention. People didn't know that there was a watershed there, but that's part of the nice thing that we're trying to do, is to really bring that the water to the forefront. So it would be awesome if during the game someone mentioned the Field of Dreams watershed. That'd be tickled, but I don't think that'll happen this year, but maybe sometime.
Awesome. Do we have any more questions here? Not seeing any more coming in. Well, we'll give everyone one more chance, but thank you again, Judy and Reed, and thank you everybody for participating in our forum here. Just as a reminder, the next one is May 18th, so mark your calendars, and we hope to see everybody there.
If you do think of anything, you can go ahead and just reach out to Reed or I, or get our emails through Kelsey, and we'd be happy to answer any sort of questions. We are planning some field trips probably later this summer within the watershed, and I believe the Iowa Water Conference is going to be in Dubuque next year. So we're hoping to get on that schedule so that we can do some field trips within that watershed in 2022.
Excellent. One last thing, this has been recorded, so it will be posted to our YouTube page if you're interested in watching it again. But I think with that, we are all done here. So thank you, everyone. We'll let everyone hop off and have a great day.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.